Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into the philosophy of science. We're going to ask some big questions. What is science, really? What isn't it? And how does it shape the way we see the world? So, think of this as our expedition. Let's get started.
But let's start with a question for you. A simple one. How are you? No, seriously, how are you doing? Or let's go bigger. What's the meaning of life? You see, science is amazing at cracking the universe's biggest mysteries, but it kind of hits a wall with questions like these. They're not about objective facts. They're about our experiences, our values, our sense of meaning. And that's where philosophy really begins.
All right, every explorer needs a map, right? Well, here's ours for today. We're going to start by looking way back at the origins of scientific thinking. Then, we'll check out two totally different ways to read our compass. We'll even question the very limits of our map, learn how to spot the fakes, the monsters lurking on the edges, and finally, figure out how to chart our own path to understanding. Okay, first stop on our journey takes us thousands of years back in time, to when people first started trying to systematically map out the world around them. You know, this quest for knowledge is as old as civilization itself. It goes all the way back to the Sumerians, figuring out there are 360 degrees in a circle, and the Egyptians basically inventing medicine while perfecting mummification. Then fast forward to ancient Greece, where philosophy and science were like the same thing. This incredible tradition was then carried on and massively expanded during the Islamic Golden Age. It really wasn't until the Renaissance and the scientific revolution that science started to look like the distinct field we recognize today. So, all that history created a kind of rulebook for what makes knowledge scientific. It can't just be any old idea. It has to be based on observation, empirical. It has to be objective, rational, and apply everywhere. And these last two are absolutely key. It's cumulative, meaning it builds on what we already know, and it's critical, which means it has to be open to being challenged, questioned, and even proven wrong. Okay, so we've got our historical map, but now we need to know how to actually read our compass. And this is where it gets interesting, because philosophers don't even agree on what science is at its core. Let's look at the two big ideas here. So on one side, you have the science as a product crew. Their view is basically that science is a big, growing collection of verified truths. Think facts, laws, theories. The scientist is just the objective observer who discovers them. But on the other side, you have the science as an activity folks. Thinkers like Thomas Kuhn argued that science is a deeply human process. Scientists are part of their culture, influenced by the dominant worldview, what he called a paradigm. For Kuhn, science doesn't just add new facts. It goes through these massive, revolutionary paradigm shifts that change everything. But here's a scary thought. What if you have a perfectly good compass, but the map itself is wrong? Or what if it's impossible to ever draw a perfect map? This is where philosophers really started to question the limits of what we can know. Let me introduce you to the philosopher David Hume. He pointed out a huge crack in the foundation of science, the problem of induction. Just because the sun has risen every single morning of your life, you have no logical guarantee it will rise tomorrow. Why? Because you haven't observed all possible sunrises. You're just making a really good guess based on past experience. And this leads us to the perfect real-world example, the black swan. For literally centuries, everyone in Europe knew for a fact that all swans were white. It was just an obvious truth. They'd seen millions of white swans and 0 of any other color. Then in 1697, someone sailed to Australia and saw a black swan. In that one single moment, a truth built on countless observations was completely shattered. Then Immanuel Kant came along and took it even further. He argued that we can never know reality as it truly is. Why not? Because our minds aren't just empty cameras recording the world. Our brains actively filter and structure everything we experience. It's like we're all wearing a pair of glasses that we can't ever take off. We're not seeing reality, we're seeing our brain's version of reality. So, does all this mean science is useless? No, not at all. It just means we need a little humility. These ideas don't kill science, they just redefine it. Science isn't a book of final answers, it's our best method for exploring the world, a powerful process of making maps, testing them, and constantly redrawing them, always knowing the map is not the territory. And you know what? Understanding these limits is actually our best defense against the monsters at the edge of the map. All those ideas that pretend to be science, but are really something else entirely. We're talking about the difference between science and pseudoscience. Okay, I want you to do something for me. Take a moment and just read this personality description on the screen. Let it sink in. Does it sound like you? So, how many of you felt like that was a pretty accurate description? It's okay, most people do. But there's a little trick going on here.
It's called the Barnum effect, and it's a classic psychological phenomenon. Our brains are wired to find patterns and make connections. So when we read a bunch of vague general statements like that, we automatically focus on the bits that fit us and ignore the rest. It feels personal, but it's not. It's the engine that powers astrology, those silly online quizzes, pretty much all of pseudoscience.
This chart just lays it out so clearly. Real science, like astronomy, makes claims you can actually test and prove wrong. It's always changing and updating with new evidence. It welcomes criticism. But pseudoscience, like astrology, the claims are vague. It hasn't changed in centuries. And if you criticize it, you're not a skeptic, you're a hater who's part of a conspiracy. See the difference? So, after all that, where does this leave us? We've seen the history, the big debates, the limits. How do we take all of this and chart a path forward for ourselves? Well, first, we have to get comfortable with the idea that there isn't always one single, correct scientific answer. Take bird migration. Why do they do it? A behavioral expert will say it's to find food and warmth. A physiologist will talk about hormones and daylight changes. So who's right? They both are. They're just different maps for the exact same territory. Sometimes we need more than one map to see the whole picture. And this brings us to a really important point. Science doesn't have to be the only map we use. Other ways of knowing can and should coexist. I love this quote. It suggests that science provides the light that helps us understand the world, but other things, like faith, art, or philosophy, can provide the warmth that gives life meaning. We need both. And that's really the big takeaway from our whole journey today. The goal of understanding the philosophy of science isn't to find that one single perfect map of reality, because that map just doesn't exist. The real goal is to become a better navigator, more thoughtful, more critical, and a little more humble as we explore. So, as we close this out, I'll leave you with a question that's not for me to answer, but for you. Knowing that every map has its own strengths and its own limits, what maps will you choose to navigate the amazing, complicated, and beautiful territory of your own life? Science versus religion. But what if I told you that this whole conflict we hear about all the time is, well, just a huge misunderstanding? We're going to walk through a new framework that might just change the way you see the whole conversation. I mean, for centuries, right? The story we've all heard is that these two are just locked in this epic, endless battle for the truth. It's a really powerful story, but what if it's just not the right one? And let's be real, this idea comes from somewhere. We all think of those historical clashes, the church going after brilliant thinkers, or on the flip side, religious traditions that just seem to shut down any kind of questioning or reason. It's led a lot of us to feel like you gotta pick a side. But what if this whole war is built on like a faulty foundation? Maybe, to get to the bottom of this, we're not supposed to be looking for an answer at all. Maybe we need to find a much, much better question. And here it is. The better question isn't if they're in conflict, it's which science and which religion are we talking about? Because let's face it, neither science nor religion are these single, solid things. Some versions of both are built on pure dogma, while others are all about rigorous, humble inquiry. Some want blind obedience, others encourage this deep, logical exploration. They're not all the same. And when we focus on the versions that are actually open to inquiry, something pretty amazing happens. We find this surprising, shared starting point. Both of them, evidence-based science and logic-based faith, begin with the exact same assumption that there's an orderly, understandable truth out there, and we humans can actually explore it. And look, this isn't some radical new idea. We're talking centuries ago. Thinkers like Giordano Bruno, who was tragically persecuted for his views, he saw the real battle lines so clearly. For him, it was never science versus faith. The real war was and is between inquiry and ignorance. And the incredible poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, he took this idea even further. He saw exploring the natural world not as some kind of threat to the divine, but as one of the most profound ways to understand it. I mean, think about that for a second. Science as an act of worship. Wow. So, okay, if they're not at war, what's their deal? What is their relationship? Well, think of it like this. They're two totally different toolkits. Both are super important, but they're designed for two completely different jobs. Let's break down those jobs. So on one hand, you've got science. Its tool is mathematics. Its whole goal is to explain the mechanics of reality, how stuff works, from the outside, from a totally objective view. And its core method is falsifiability. That just means a theory is only scientific if you can test it and, this is key, potentially prove it wrong. Now, on the other hand, you have logic-based faith. Its tool isn't math, it's reason and logic. Its goal isn't to explain how things work, but to understand meaning. It's digging into those big internal questions. Why are we even here? What does it mean to be good? What's my purpose? These are things science can't put under a microscope, but that logic can explore to see if they make sense together. And this distinction, explaining versus understanding, it's absolutely crucial. Because once you see it, you realize the true conflict was never, ever between science and religion. It's actually between two fundamentally different ways of thinking. The real enemy here, the real source of all the fighting, is dogmatism. It's anyone, and it doesn't matter if they call themselves a scientist or a believer who stands up and says, I have the absolute, final, unchangeable truth, so everybody can stop asking questions now. That's the problem. So this is the real divide. You've got the dogmatist who just says, I have the answer. Conversation over. But then you have the inquirer who says, look, I'm on a journey towards truth, and I totally accept that uncertainty is going to be my travel buddy the whole way. And there's this incredibly powerful concept from Islamic philosophy that just nails this idea of dogmatism. It's called shirk. Now, it's usually translated as idolatry, but it's so much deeper than that. It's the mistake of treating any idea, including your own precious beliefs, as if it's absolute, final, and divine. It's basically the ultimate dead end for your mind. Okay, so if dogmatism, or shirk, is the big trap we all want to avoid, what's the way out? How do we actually move forward in a way that makes room for both knowledge and meaning? The alternative is a state of mind, a way of being called taqwa. And this is just a beautiful concept. It's not just about learning stuff. It's a passionate, nonstop, but deeply humble search for truth. It's that fire in your gut that drives you to know more, combined with the wisdom to know you'll never, ever have it all figured out. And this taqwa mindset, it's not just a nice idea. It gives us a practical roadmap for living, sometimes called the straight path. It's basically a 4-step process. Step 1, believe that a coherent truth and meaning are actually out there. 2, use the tools of science to explain the world from the outside. 3, use the tools of logic to understand meaning from the inside. And 4, and this might be the most important one, embrace uncertainty. Make it your constant companion on the journey.
So where does this path lead? The whole point isn't to choose between two separate worlds. The goal isn't a cold, empty world of facts or a blind, thoughtless world of dogma. It's to become a traveler on one single path, a path that's illuminated by the bright light of science and at the same time warmed by a faith in the very existence of meaning itself.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? This framework completely transforms one of our oldest cultural battles. It's no longer about picking a side in some big war. Instead, it invites each of us on a personal journey of discovery, a journey where we use every single tool we have to explore the universe both outside of us and inside of us. So I'll just leave you with this. What could change if you saw it that way? What might you discover on that path? Have you ever noticed how conversations about religion just get stuck? We end up arguing about what to believe, but we almost never talk about how we believe. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to move past the arguments and try to build a toolkit for thinking more clearly about faith, identity, and, well, what it even means to believe in something. Okay, let's get into it. So let's start with a paradox, something you see all the time. On one hand, you've got someone who'll say, yeah, I'm a Muslim, but they might not know some of the absolute basics. And on the other hand, you meet someone who says, I'm an atheist, but they live their life by this incredibly strong moral code. These aren't just made-up examples, right? They're things you hear, and they point to a really deep confusion. And this leads us right to the heart of the matter. What does it actually mean to believe? I mean, if it's not just the label we give ourselves, and it's not just the facts we have memorized, then what is it? That's the big question we're going to try and unpack layer by layer.
To start chipping away at that question, let's begin at the surface level. What we say, the labels we use for ourselves. This is where you find those contradictions we just talked about, the ones that are easiest to spot.
Now, the point here isn't to judge anybody or call people out. Not at all. It's just to recognize a very, very human thing. Belief is messy. It's so much more complicated than just picking a team. Our identity, what we do, and what we know, they don't always line up in a neat little row. And just getting that, just understanding that, is the first big step. So this gap between our words and our actions, it's often a symptom of something much deeper. You take a religion with one single sacred book. How is it possible that it can lead to thousands of different, sometimes completely opposite points of view? Well, the answer lies in this really important distinction. And here it is, the core of it all. On one side, you have the divine text. For believers, this is seen as perfect, unchanging, like a single pure beam of light. But then, on the other side, you have us, human understanding. We're like a prism. That light hits us and it shatters into a whole spectrum of different colors, different interpretations. That process is 100% human, and it's shaped by everything, our culture, our language, our personal experiences. Which means it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be fallible. And get this idea is not some modern invention. Way back in early Islamic tradition, you have this famous saying. It suggests that all this diversity, all these different opinions, it isn't a mistake. It's a feature, not a bug. It means a healthy community isn't one where everybody is a carbon copy, but one that's strong and flexible because of all its different viewpoints. This is why, for centuries, Islamic scholars would end these massive, brilliant works of commentary with the simple phrase, Allahu alam, God knows best. Think about how powerful that is. It's them saying, look, I gave it my best shot. This is my sincere effort to understand, but it's not the final word. My human interpretation is not the same as divine truth. It's this incredible act of intellectual humility, and it leaves the door open for other people to have their own take. Okay, now we have to peel back another layer, and this one gets a little more tricky. What happens when that human interpretation isn't just a sincere attempt to understand, but when it's driven by a political agenda? This is a key idea you have to grasp. It's called the expansion of religion. It's what happens when a rule made by people, often for a very human reason like political control or state security, gets dressed up in religious clothing and presented as if it's a divine, unchangeable law that came straight from God. Let's look at a really powerful example from history. The Quran is very clear that belief is a matter of personal choice. It says, let people believe or disbelieve as they will. And it doesn't mention any kind of earthly punishment for leaving the faith. And yet later in history, in certain political situations, the death penalty for apostasy became a law. Why? Well, because political leaders started treating religious dissent as if it were treason against the state. They took a political problem and created a religious solution, which in effect expanded the religion to serve their political goals. All right, let's go deeper still, right down to the philosophical bedrock. When someone uses the word God, we all kind of nod along like we know what they're talking about. But if you look at classical Islamic philosophy, you find there isn't just one concept of God. There are wildly different competing ideas, and they have huge consequences for everything. So two major schools of thought really battled this out. On one side, you had a group called the Mu'tazila. They basically argued for a universe of law. God, they said, created a rational world that runs on cause and effect, and then gave us free will to act within that system. But on the other side, the Ash'ari school argued for a universe of constant direct intervention. They said every single thing that happens, a leaf falling, your heart beating, is a direct and separate act of God. There is no independent cause and effect. And trust me, this is not just some dusty old debate. The real-world consequences are massive. If you believe in a universe of law, then science makes perfect sense. You can study cause and effect because it's a real thing. It also means you're responsible for your choices. But if you believe in a universe of constant intervention, well, that can lead to fatalism.
If a bridge collapses because someone built it badly, was that human error? Or was it just God's will? Your entire worldview changes based on the answer.
The great philosopher Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, saw a huge danger in that interventionist idea. He argued that it turns God into basically a tyrannical king who just does whatever he wants, whenever he wants. It paints a picture of a universe ruled by whim, not reason. I mean, that just shows you how high the stakes were in this debate.
So after peeling back all these layers, identity, interpretation, politics, philosophy, we finally get to the very heart of it all. What's the ultimate test? What's the final measure of a belief?
One of the sources we drew from has this absolutely brilliant analogy. It says, you don't judge a factory by its mission statement or its fancy advertising. You judge it by the quality of the products it actually puts out into the world. In the same way, the true test of any religion or any belief system isn't what it claims about itself. It's the output. What kind of people does it produce? What kind of societies does it build? Are they compassionate? Are they just? Are they creative?
And that one simple idea completely changes the conversation. It shifts the focus away from arguing about who has the right doctrine and moves it toward observing real-world results. It suggests that the most important question isn't, what do you say you believe? It's, what does your life show that you believe?
So here it is. This is the toolkit we've been putting together this whole time. Number 1, always separate the divine text from the flawed human interpretation of it. 2, scrutinize what you hear. Keep an eye out for political goals hiding behind religious language. 3, define your terms. Before you argue about God, figure out which God you're even talking about. And finally, number 4, observe the fruits. At the end of the day, let a person's actions, not just their words, tell you what they really believe. And that leaves us with one final and pretty personal question. If we put all the labels aside for a second, and we just look at the sum total of our actions, what we spend our time on, how we treat people, the values our life actually demonstrates, what do those actions say we believe in? What is our true creed?
We're going to break down the psychology of this religious self-deception and, you guessed it, the excuses we tell ourselves.
So let's just kick things off with a question that honestly hits home for every single one of us, no matter what we believe. Why do we make excuses? I mean, why do we build these complex justifications when what we do just doesn't quite match up with what we claim to believe?
Well, the book we're exploring today, by author Emre Dorman, gives this a name: religious self-deception. It's basically that gap, that space between our beliefs and our actions. And the excuses? Well, they're like these mental bridges we build over that gap just so we can manage the conflict and live with ourselves.
So at the very center of all this is this powerful internal conflict, right? A constant tension between our stated beliefs and our day-to-day behavior. And the book argues that to cope with that discomfort, without actually changing what we do, we invent these little mental workarounds, these really elaborate excuses.
All right, let's jump into the first major category of excuses. This one is so interesting because it's not about denying faith at all. It's actually the opposite. It's about using our own idea of ourselves as a good person, as the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. And the author points to this as maybe one of the most common and powerful excuses of them all. My heart is clean. You've probably heard it. It's this idea that just having good intentions is what really counts, no matter what our actions look like. But this is where the book draws a really sharp line in the sand. It argues that this whole clean heart defense just turns faith into a passive, feel-good thing. And the counter-argument is pretty powerful. True faith actually demands action, and it's our actions that ultimately show what's really going on in our hearts. And the author backs this up with a direct quote from the Quran, which basically says, hey, don't go around claiming you're pure. True piety is shown through what you do, and in the end, it's something only God truly knows. So the big insight here is that from this perspective, faith isn't just about intention, it's defined by action. And this slide just captures the paradox perfectly, doesn't it? We have to have immediate gratification for worldly things, but we're totally fine postponing the spiritual stuff that we claim is eternal. The huge takeaway here is just how easily we prioritize the temporary over the timeless.
So here's a crucial point. Our excuses don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're heavily shaped by the world around us, and often we look to everybody else to justify our own inaction. And that leads us to a massive rationalization, the safety of the herd. The logic is simple, and it's powerful. Hey, if everyone else is living this way, it must be okay, right?
The final reckoning.
Well, the book concludes that whether it's the clean heart or the promise of I'll do it later or just hiding in the safety of the crowd, these are all just temporary fixes. They're like psychological band-aids that help us manage that conflict between our beliefs and our actions, but they never, ever truly fix it.
And this is the final heavy idea the book leaves us with. It brings up this verse from the Quran to argue that, in the end, all of those carefully built excuses are just going to crumble. Why? Because on the day of judgment, the main witness against us is going to be ourselves.
And so the real takeaway here isn't about judging anybody else. It's about taking this whole analysis and turning the mirror back on ourselves. It leaves us with a pretty provocative final question, really just prompting a moment of honest self-reflection for all of us.